Emily, anyone can do your job. You're replaceable. Mark Henderson's words hung in the conference room like poison. My heart stopped. Around the table, my colleagues froze, their eyes darting between Mark and me. He leaned back in his chair, that smug smile spreading across his face. I'm giving your promotion to Chad Morrison. He starts tomorrow. Chad. His golfing buddy's 24-year-old son who'd never worked in logistics. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. My face burned with humiliation. I'd trained every person at this table. I'd fixed their mistakes. I'd saved clients. I'd stayed until midnight while Mark left at 3. And now, in front of everyone, he was throwing me away like garbage. Clean out your desk, Mark added casually, as if he'd just asked me to file paperwork. The silence was deafening. Nobody looked at me. Nobody defended me. They just stared at their laptops, suddenly very interested in their screens. I stood slowly, my legs shaking, and walked out. I couldn't stop replaying the past 3 months as I sat in my car. Mark had been unusually kind lately, always asking about my progress on the Q4 logistics report. That massive project that analyzed our entire supply chain, identified cost savings, and restructured our vendor relationships. I'd worked weekends on it, skipped lunches, stayed late every single night. He'd praised me constantly, telling me how valuable I was, how this report would secure my promotion. I'd believed him. I'd trusted him. Last week, he'd even brought me coffee, asking detailed questions about my methodology. I'd shown him everything, walked him through every spreadsheet, explained every calculation. He'd nodded along, taking notes, telling me I was brilliant. Now I understood why. He'd needed me to finish the project first. He'd needed my analysis, my research, my work. Then he could hand it all to Chad and take credit himself. I wasn't being replaced. I was being used, then discarded. My phone buzzed. An email from HR. My stomach dropped as I opened it. But it wasn't addressed to me. It was forwarded accidentally, meant for Mark. We'll terminate Emily immediately after she finishes the Q4 logistics report. Once we have her analysis, Chad can take her place. Please confirm timeline. I read it 3 times, my hands trembling. They'd planned this. Weeks ago, they'd planned this. While I was working myself to exhaustion, while Mark was bringing me coffee and praising my dedication, he was scheduling my execution. I took a screenshot, my heart pounding. Then I noticed something else. There was another message in the email thread, sent 2 days ago. I scrolled down, hardly breathing. Reminder, don't tell Emily about the audit. We need her gone before the auditors arrive. Chad will handle any questions about the logistics department. My blood ran cold. What audit? Why would they need me gone before auditors arrived? What were they hiding? I sat in my car for an hour, reading every email in that thread. The picture became horrifyingly clear. A major client had reported missing funds, discrepancies in shipping charges, invoices that didn't match actual deliveries. Corporate was sending auditors to investigate the logistics department. My department. Mark's department. And somehow, they planned to blame me. One email spelled it out. Once Emily is terminated, any irregularities can be attributed to her mismanagement. Chad will testify that he discovered problems in her systems. They were setting me up. Mark had been approving questionable invoices for months, inflating vendor charges, possibly pocketing the difference. And now that an audit was coming, he needed a scapegoat. Someone who was no longer there to defend themselves. Someone who'd conveniently just been fired for performance issues. Me. I wasn't just replaceable. I was expendable. A sacrifice to save Mark's career. My shock turned to something else. Something cold and calculating. They expected me to leave quietly, humiliated and broken. They had no idea what was coming. I walked back into the office with my head high. My colleagues avoided eye contact as I packed my desk. Photos of my family. The coffee mug my team gave me last Christmas. The plant I'd kept alive for 3 years. Mark walked past twice, watching me with satisfaction. I smiled at him both times. His confidence faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. He expected tears, anger, a scene. Instead, I was calm, methodical, professional. I copied my personal notes to a flash drive, nothing that belonged to the company, just my own observations and documentation. Things I'd written in my own time, on my own laptop at home. Mark didn't know I kept parallel records of everything. He didn't know I'd noticed those suspicious invoices months ago and documented them privately. I'd even reported one once, but Mark had dismissed it as a vendor error. I had the email where he told me not to worry about it. As I carried my box to the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I heard what they did to you. Call me. The voice on the phone was familiar. Emily, it's Lydia. From accounting. Lydia. She'd quit 6 months ago, suddenly, without explanation. We'd been friendly, shared lunch sometimes. Then one day she was gone. I heard Mark fired you, she said. I'm so sorry. But I need to tell you something. The same thing happened to me. We met at a coffee shop across town. Lydia looked different, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted. Mark pinned a vendor payment error on me, she explained. I caught a discrepancy in an invoice. When I reported it to him, he told me to process it anyway. 2 weeks later, HR called me in. Mark claimed I'd approved an unauthorized payment. They had my signature on the form he'd told me to sign. I was fired for negligence. She stirred her coffee slowly. But here's what I learned after I left. Mark has done this before. 3 times in 5 years. He finds someone loyal, works them hard, then uses them as a shield when problems surface. My hands clenched around my cup. Why didn't you fight back? I tried. But HR protects him. His uncle is on the board. She leaned forward. But Emily, that audit you don't know about yet? It might finally catch him. Lydia explained everything. Mark had been inflating vendor invoices for 2 years, approving payments to companies that either didn't exist or charged far more than the actual services provided. The difference went somewhere, she suspected, into Mark's pocket or to contractors who kicked money back to him. He's not smart enough to hide it forever, Lydia said. But he is smart enough to have a fall guy ready. That was supposed to be you. She showed me her own documentation, things she'd kept from her time there. Invoice discrepancies. Email exchanges where Mark had pressured her to approve questionable payments. I was too scared to use these when they fired me, she admitted. But you're different. You're stronger. And if you play this right, Mark will destroy himself. I thought about the Q4 report sitting on Mark's desk. My analysis would show every vendor payment, every contract, every discrepancy. If auditors compared my accurate report to Mark's inflated invoices, the truth would surface. Unless Mark blamed the discrepancies on my errors. But what if I wasn't there to be blamed? What if I was somewhere else, with my own evidence, ready to tell the truth? I spent the weekend applying to every company in the industry. My resume was strong, my experience solid. By Monday, I had 3 phone interviews scheduled. By Wednesday, I was sitting across from Karen Williams, HR director at Dalton Industries, our biggest competitor. Karen was sharp, professional, direct. She reviewed my portfolio with genuine interest. Your experience is exactly what we need, she said. We've been trying to recruit someone with your logistics background for months. Your analysis methodology is impressive. She named a salary that was 30% higher than what I'd been making. Better hours. Better benefits. Actual growth opportunities. For the first time since Mark's betrayal, I felt hope. But before we extend an offer, Karen said, her expression shifting, I need to show you something. I used to work at your company. I know Mark Henderson. My stomach tightened. And I need you to understand what you're dealing with. Karen pulled out a folder. Mark has a reputation in the industry. He retaliates against former employees. Sabotages references. Spreads rumors about performance issues. She showed me examples. 2 former employees who'd been blacklisted after leaving. Another who'd been sued for breach of contract over a technicality. He's vindictive, Karen said. And he's connected. If you want to work in this industry, you need to protect yourself. She leaned forward. Document everything. Every conversation. Every email. Every piece of work you did. Build an airtight record that proves your competence and his misconduct. If he comes after you, you need to be ready. I told her about the audit, about Mark's plan to blame me. Karen's expression darkened. Then we need to move carefully. I'll extend the job offer today, but we'll hold your start date. If auditors contact you, you cooperate fully. Truth is your best weapon. That evening, my personal email pinged. Subject line, urgent, client complaint. My former colleague Angela had forwarded it. Chad had deleted an entire client folder. $40,000 in shipment errors. All in his first week. Angela's note was brief, Mark is blaming your confusing filing system. The next morning, I called Angela from my personal phone. Tell me everything. She spoke quietly, clearly hiding in a bathroom or stairwell. Chad is a disaster. He doesn't understand the systems. He keeps asking questions Mark can't answer. Yesterday, he sent an unapproved logistics report to a client. The client called, furious, saying the routes made no sense. Mark is scrambling. I almost laughed. Almost. And he's blaming me. He sent HR a formal memo. Said your documentation was incomplete. That Chad is discovering multiple errors in your systems. Emily, they're building a case that you sabotaged everything before you left. My comm cracked slightly. I left detailed notes. Everything was organized perfectly. Mark watched me do it. I know. We all know. But Mark needs a story that makes Chad look good and you look bad. That afternoon, I received an official email from HR. They were requesting my personal documentation to clarify discrepancies in the transition. It was a trap. Anything I sent could be twisted to support Mark's narrative. I forwarded it to Karen. Karen called me immediately. Don't respond yet. We're going to do this properly. She connected me with Dalton Industries legal counsel, who helped me draft a response. It was polite, professional, and legally airtight. I provided only what was requested, nothing more. Clear timestamps showing when I'd created each document. Email confirmations proving I'd submitted everything properly before leaving. Screenshots of my organized file systems. Everything dated and verified. This protects you, the attorney explained. If they claim your work was inadequate, this proves otherwise. If they claim you sabotaged anything, the timestamps prove you couldn't have. I sent the response, then waited. 2 days later, Angela texted me. The audit started today. Mark looks terrified. The auditors had arrived unannounced, requesting immediate access to all logistics department records. They wanted to interview everyone who touched vendor payments in the last 2 years, including me. The email came that evening. Ms. Carter, we request your presence for an interview regarding departmental procedures and vendor management protocols. Please confirm your availability. I smiled as I typed my response. I'm happy to help in any way possible. The audit interview took place at a neutral office building downtown. 2 auditors, both middle-aged professionals with sharp eyes and notepads. They started with basic questions. My role. My responsibilities. The systems I'd maintained. I answered calmly, factually, showing them the documentation I'd kept. My personal notes on vendor relationships. The spreadsheets I'd created tracking invoice patterns. The email where I'd once questioned a suspicious charge and Mark had told me to ignore it. Their eyebrows rose at that last part. You reported a discrepancy and were told to ignore it, the lead auditor asked. Yes. I documented it at the time, in my personal records. I was concerned, but Mark said it was a vendor error that would be corrected. It never was. I showed them the email chain. Mark's dismissive response. The invoice in question, which I'd tracked and noted had never been corrected. The auditors exchanged glances. Did you approve this payment? No. Only Mark has approval authority over that threshold. They made notes, their pens moving quickly. Has this pattern occurred before? I hesitated, then decided truth was my only option. Yes. Several times. I kept notes because I was worried. The auditors spent 45 minutes reviewing my documentation. Every questionable invoice I'd flagged privately. Every time Mark had overridden normal procedures. Every vendor payment that seemed excessive. This is extremely detailed, the senior auditor said. Why didn't you report this formally? I reported the first one. Mark told me I was overstepping. That vendor relationships were his responsibility, not mine. After that, I just kept my own records in case questions came up later. They asked about Chad, about the transition, about my firing. I stuck to facts. No emotion. No accusations. Just clear, documented truth. Mr. Henderson claims you left the department in disarray, the auditor said, watching my reaction. That your documentation was incomplete and your systems were poorly organized. I pulled out my laptop, showing them the detailed transition notes I'd prepared. Screenshots timestamped before my termination. Organized folders. Clear instructions. Everything was documented and transferred properly. I can provide HR confirmation of my final day procedures. The auditor nodded slowly. Ms. Carter, You understand you're not under investigation. Yes. But you should know Mr. Henderson might be. My heart soared, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm just here to help however I can. Over the next 2 weeks, the audit expanded. According to Angela, who kept me updated, the auditors had discovered a pattern. Multiple vendors with inflated charges. Payments approved only by Mark. Services that couldn't be verified. Chad had unknowingly made things worse by admitting to the auditors that Mark had told him to just sign whatever I give you. That single statement had implicated Mark in deliberately circumventing proper approval procedures. The breaking point came when auditors found 3 vendors that didn't exist at all. Shell companies with payment histories stretching back 18 months. Mark had approved every invoice. Meanwhile, Chad continued failing spectacularly. Another client threatened to leave. A shipment got sent to the wrong state. The logistics department was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Employees were openly questioning why Mark had fired the only person who knew what she was doing. Then I got the call I'd been waiting for. Ms. Carter, this is Thomas Bryant from corporate headquarters. We'd like you to attend a board review meeting next Tuesday. Your presence has been requested to clarify certain operational procedures. Mark would be there. I'd be facing him across a conference table. And this time, I had the truth on my side. I walked into that boardroom with my head high. The board members sat along one side of the massive table. Mark sat at the opposite end, his lawyer beside him. Chad wasn't there. He'd apparently resigned 3 days earlier in what Angela called a tearful meltdown. Karen had helped me prepare. Come answers. Stick to facts. Let Mark's lies unravel themselves. The board chair, a stern woman named Patricia Holmes, began. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming. We're reviewing operational irregularities in the logistics department. We understand you managed vendor relationships for several years. Yes, ma'am. Until my termination 2 months ago. Can you walk us through your vendor approval process? I did, clearly and methodically. How I researched vendors. How I verified services. How I tracked invoices against actual deliveries. How I flagged discrepancies. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. And when you found discrepancies, what was your protocol? I reported them to my supervisor, Mark Henderson. He had final approval authority. And did he address these discrepancies? I pulled out my documentation. Not that I'm aware of. I have records of 7 instances where I questioned invoice amounts. In each case, Mark instructed me to process the payments anyway. I slid copies across the table. The board members read in silence. Mark's lawyer stood. Ms. Carter's documentation is selective. She's presenting herself as a whistleblower, but in reality, she was terminated for performance issues and poor judgment. I remained calm. I was terminated 1 week after completing a comprehensive analysis that would have highlighted these exact discrepancies. You were terminated because Mr. Henderson determined you were no longer meeting performance standards. Then why was I asked to complete a major analytical project right before my termination? Why did Mr. Henderson praise my work consistently until the day he fired me? The board members exchanged glances. Patricia Holmes spoke. Mr. Henderson, can you explain the timeline of Ms. Carter's termination? Mark cleared his throat. Emily's performance had been declining for months. We needed her to finish the Q4 report, but we'd already decided to restructure her position. And you replaced her with someone with no logistics experience. Chad had fresh perspectives. New ideas. Mr. Henderson, another board member interjected, we've reviewed the department's performance since Ms. Carter's departure. Client complaints have increased 400%. Costs have risen significantly. Multiple operational errors have occurred. Can you explain this? Mark's face reddened. Chad needed time to adjust. The systems Emily left were confusing. Her transition documentation says otherwise. The meeting lasted 3 hours. With each question, Mark's story unraveled further. He contradicted himself. He blamed me, then blamed Chad, then blamed systemic issues. He claimed he'd been trying to fix problems I'd created, but couldn't explain why those problems only appeared after I left. The auditors presented their preliminary findings. The shell companies. The inflated invoices. The pattern of payments that Mark alone had approved. Mr. Henderson, Patricia Holmes said, her voice ice cold, did you approve payments to vendors that don't exist? I trusted the invoices I received. But you're the one who received them. You're the one who created the purchase orders. You're the one who approved payments. Mark's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. I'd like to request a recess. Denied. Mr. Henderson, we have documentation that you created purchase orders, submitted invoices, and approved payments to 3 companies that have no business licenses, no physical addresses, and no employees. Can you explain this? Mark stood suddenly. This is a witch hunt? You're trying to destroy me because Emily poisoned you against me? She's always been vindictive. She couldn't handle being replaced, so she fabricated evidence. The room fell silent. Patricia Holmes stared at him. Mr. Henderson, are you accusing Ms. Carter of fraud? I'm saying she's lying. She's manipulating you. Sit down, Mr. Henderson. Mark didn't sit. Instead, he pointed at me, his face purple with rage. She planned this? She wanted my job, and when she didn't get it, she sabotaged everything? She probably created those fake vendors herself. His lawyer grabbed his arm. Mark, stop talking. But Mark was past reason. I built that department. I saved this company millions? And you're going to believe some bitter, mediocre analyst over me. Patricia Holmes stood. Mr. Henderson, you're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You're prohibited from accessing company systems or contacting company personnel pending the completion of this investigation. You can't do this. We just did. Your badge and credentials, please. 2 security officers appeared at the door. Mark looked around wildly, realizing he'd destroyed himself. His eyes landed on me. This is your fault, he hissed as security led him away. You'll regret this. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The truth had spoken for itself. After he left, Patricia Holmes turned to me. Ms. Carter, we owe you an apology. This should never have happened. I nodded, accepting but not forgetting. We'd like to discuss reinstating your position, with appropriate compensation for our failures. The offer was generous. Triple my old salary. A senior management position. Stock options. A formal written apology. Public recognition of my contributions. I sat in Patricia Holmes's office, reviewing the contract they'd drafted. Everything I'd wanted once upon a time. Everything Mark had denied me. This is a very fair offer, I said carefully. It is. We want to make this right. I thought about the last 2 months. The humiliation in that conference room. The fear and uncertainty. The way Mark had tried to destroy not just my career but my reputation. Then I thought about Karen, about Dalton Industries, about the respect I'd found there. I appreciate this more than you know, I said. But I've accepted another position. I start next week. Patricia's eyebrows rose. We can match any offer. It's not about money. It's about working somewhere that valued me before I could prove Mark wrong. Somewhere that believed in me when I had nothing but my word and my documentation. She nodded slowly. I understand. But the offer remains open if you change your mind. As I stood to leave, she added, for what it's worth, you handled this with remarkable professionalism. Mark's downfall was entirely his own doing. You just documented it. I smiled. That's all I ever did. Document the truth. The final investigation took another month. Corporate brought in forensic accountants who traced every suspicious payment. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Mark had been embezzling for 3 years, funneling money through fake vendors and inflated invoices. The total exceeded $200,000. He'd been sophisticated enough to hide it in small increments, but sloppy enough to leave traces everywhere once someone actually looked. He'd planned to pin it on me, claim I'd set up the scheme and he'd only discovered it after firing me. That's why he needed me gone before the audit. That's why he'd been so confident. The company filed criminal charges. Mark was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. The news spread through the industry instantly. His LinkedIn profile disappeared. His professional reputation evaporated overnight. Lydia called me when she heard. You did it. You actually took him down. I just told the truth. He took himself down. Still. 3 of us tried to stop him over the years. You're the one who succeeded. I'd succeeded because I'd documented everything. Because I'd stayed calm. Because I'd been strategic instead of emotional. And because I'd had help from people like Lydia and Karen who'd believed me. My first day at Dalton Industries felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Karen introduced me to the team, respected professionals who treated me like a colleague, not a subordinate. My office had windows. My title was Senior Logistics Director. My boss actually listened when I spoke. During my first meeting, I presented ideas I'd been developing for years, innovations Mark had always dismissed. Here, people took notes, asked questions, implemented changes. This is brilliant, my new supervisor said after I outlined a vendor verification system. Why hasn't anyone done this before? Some people prefer not to look too closely at vendor relationships, I said carefully. He laughed, understanding immediately. Well, we're glad you're looking closely now. Over lunch, Karen asked how I was adjusting. It's surreal, I admitted. I keep waiting for someone to dismiss my ideas or take credit for my work. That won't happen here. We hired you because you're exceptional. Own it. Owning it. Such a simple concept, yet something I'd never been allowed to do at my old company. For the first time in years, I felt valued, respected, heard. That evening, my personal email pinged. Mark. The subject line read, "Please." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. Emily, I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. But I'm asking you to please help me. The company is pressing charges. My lawyer says I could face jail time. I've lost everything. My reputation. My career. My family is struggling. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I'm not a criminal. If you could just talk to the board, explain that things got out of hand, that you don't want me prosecuted, maybe they'd drop the charges. You're the one person who might have influence with them now. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong to fire you. But please, I'm begging you. Don't let them destroy my life over this. I read it twice, feeling nothing. No satisfaction. No pity. Just emptiness where anger used to be. He'd called me replaceable. He'd humiliated me publicly. He'd tried to frame me for his crimes. And now he wanted my help. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote, Mark, you made your choices. Face the consequences like an adult. I owe you nothing. I hit send, then blocked his email address. The criminal trial lasted 3 weeks. I wasn't required to testify, the forensic evidence was overwhelming. But I attended the sentencing hearing, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Mark looked smaller somehow, diminished. His expensive suit couldn't hide the defeat in his posture. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. Mr. Henderson, you abused your position of trust. You stole from your employer. You attempted to frame an innocent employee for your crimes. You showed no remorse until you were caught. Mark's lawyer tried to argue for leniency. Family circumstances. First offense. Willingness to make restitution. The judge was unmoved. 15 months in federal prison. 5 years probation. Full restitution of stolen funds plus penalties. Mark's shoulders slumped. As they led him away, he scanned the courtroom. His eyes found mine. I held his gaze steadily, letting him see that I felt nothing. No triumph. No sympathy. Just closure. Outside, a reporter approached me. Ms. Carter, how does it feel to see justice served? I'm just glad the truth came out. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? I considered that. Forgiveness isn't something he's earned. But I'm not carrying his burden anymore. I've moved on. And I had. Completely. 6 months later, I was thriving. I'd been promoted to Vice President of Logistics Operations at Dalton Industries. My team had implemented revolutionary vendor verification systems that became industry standard. I was invited to speak at conferences, write articles, mentor young professionals. My old company reached out periodically, always with the same message, the offer stands if I ever want to return. I never responded. That chapter was closed. One afternoon, Karen and I had lunch to celebrate landing a major contract. You know, she said, when you first walked into my office, I saw someone beaten down. Now look at you. Confident. Successful. Happy. Mark did me a favor, I admitted. If he hadn't fired me, I'd probably still be there, working too hard and getting too little recognition. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he hadn't been so greedy? I thought about it. He would have kept using people until someone finally stopped him. I'm just glad I was the one who documented it. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn message from Angela, my former colleague. Thought you'd want to know, the company just promoted someone to Mark's old position. They're completely rebuilding the department using your systems and protocols. Your legacy is everywhere. I smiled. My legacy. Not Mark's. Mine. A year after Mark called me replaceable, I stood in front of 300 industry professionals at the National Logistics Conference. The keynote speaker. Leadership isn't about taking credit, I told the audience. It's about building systems that outlast you. It's about developing people, not using them. It's about integrity, even when no one's watching. I saw heads nodding throughout the crowd. After my speech, dozens of people approached me. Young professionals seeking advice. Executives wanting to implement my systems. Companies offering opportunities. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, reflecting on the journey. From that humiliating moment in the conference room to standing on stage as an industry leader, Mark had tried to make me disappear. Instead, he'd freed me to become someone greater. My phone rang. Patricia Holmes from my old company. Emily, I just watched your keynote online. It was brilliant. I have to ask one more time, won't you consider coming back? You could write your own terms. I smiled at the irony. Patricia, I'm happy where I am, but I appreciate the offer. After we hung up, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Strong, confident, successful. Mark had been right about one thing, I was replaceable. But the only thing that fell apart when he replaced me was him.